Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something that sounds, well, maybe a bit obscure, but has huge implications.
Yeah.
China's recent move to restrict exports of rare earth minerals.
That's right. And we're digging into a BBC News piece that does a really good job laying out why this is such a big deal, especially for the U.S., given all the trade tensions floating around.
Exactly. So our goal here is pretty straightforward.
Mm.
We want to get a clear handle on, first, what are rare earths? Why does China's control matter so much? And, what could the fallout be for the U.S.?
It really cuts to the core, doesn't it? These elements, they're the hidden ingredients in, well, almost everything high tech. This move by China really puts a spotlight on global dependencies.
Okay, so let's start there. What exactly are these rare earths? The BBC article calls them 17 chemically similar elements, vital for high-tech manufacturing.
Hmm.
But the name rare, that's a bit confusing, isn't it? Sounds like they're hard to find.
Yeah, that's a common misconception, and the article clears it up well. They're actually relatively abundant in the Earth's crust, um, but the tricky part is finding them concentrated enough to mine economically.
Ah, okay, so it's not scarcity, it's the difficulty of extraction.
Precisely. And purification. They're often mixed together, and separating them is complex, expensive, and frankly, pretty hazardous environmentally. That's the rare part, finding them in a pure, usable form economically.
Got it. And the names are things like neodymium, yttrium, europium.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of sci-fi. But the article connects them to everyday stuff.
Absolutely critical connection. Think about neodymium. It makes those super strong, tiny magnets. They're in your phone speaker, your computer's hard drive.
Yeah.
The motors in electric cars, even jet engines rely on them. Then you have yttrium and europium, essential for the bright colors on your TV or computer screen.
Right. So that quote from Thomas Krumer, everything you can switch on or off likely runs on rare earths, isn't much of an exaggeration then.
Not at all. It really hits the nail on the head. It shows how fundamental they've become.
And it goes beyond just gadgets, right? The article mentions medical tech and defense applications too.
Yes, absolutely. Things like laser surgery, MRI machines, they need rare earths. But the defense angle is, well, especially relevant given these new restrictions. That's where this idea of dual use comes in strongly.
Okay, let's pivot to China's role. The BBC piece says they have, what, almost a monopoly. How did that come about?
It's pretty staggering. The IAI figures cited are, I think, around 61% of global mining and something like 92% of the processing.
92% in processing.
Yeah. That gives them immense control over the entire supply chain. It's not just digging it up, it's turning it into usable materials.
And the article points out why others maybe haven't kept up. It's dirty work, right? The environmental side.
Exactly. Extraction and processing are costly, yes, but also environmentally challenging. You're often dealing with radioactive elements mixed in. Disposal is a major headache. Mr. Krumer mentioned even the EU struggles with permanent disposal sites.
So China was willing to take on those costs.
Well, yes, and combine that with decades of strategic government policy and investment, this wasn't an accident.
Right. The article stresses the long-term strategy.
Absolutely. It goes back to the late 20th century, Deng Xiaoping's famous quote from '92, "The Middle East has oil and China has rare earths." That shows the foresight.
Wow.
And Gavin Harper, quoted in the piece, points out China prioritized development, sometimes, with lower environmental and labor standards, that allowed them to undercut competitors and really build this dominant position.
Okay, so that sets the stage for these recent export restrictions.
Mhm.
What exactly did China do?
So essentially, in response to U.S. tariffs as other trade pressures, China put export controls on 7 specific heavy rare earth minerals, and these are particularly vital for the defense industry.
Heavy rare earths. Why are they singled out?
They're generally less common than the light rare earths, much harder to separate and process, and they have unique properties essential for high-performance applications, especially magnets used in, say, guidance systems or radar.
And this kicked in recently. April 4th, the article said.
That's right, April 4th. Now companies need special licenses to export these specific materials and magnets made from them out of China.
And their justification?
China frames it under their obligations as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty. They classify these as dual-use products.
Meaning they have both civilian and military uses.
Exactly. So they argue they need to control the export to prevent potential misuse, particularly related to nuclear weapons tech. It gives them a sort of international framework justification.
Which conveniently also puts pressure on countries reliant on them.
Precisely. And it hits a key U.S. vulnerability. That CSIS report highlighted the almost total lack of heavy rare earth processing capability outside of China.
So let's talk impact. Given the vulnerability in U.S. reliance, what does this mean for the states? The article sounded pretty concerned.
It's definitely cause for concern. That U.S. Geological Survey data is stark between 2020 and 2023. The U.S. got 70% of its rare earth compounds and metals from China. 70%.
That's huge dependence. And the defense sector impact sounds particularly worrying.
Absolutely. The article mentions the CSIS report listing things like the F-35 jet, Tomahawk missiles, Predator drones, all rely on these heavy rare earths now under tighter control.
And this is happening while China is apparently ramping up its own military production.
Yeah, the article notes reports suggesting China's munitions production is expanding maybe 5 or 6 times faster than the U.S. So Mr. Krummer's assessment that the impact on the U.S. defense industry will be substantial seems pretty spot on.
It's not just defense, though.
Yeah.
What about manufacturing generally?
Yeah.
President Trump had that big push for bringing manufacturing back.
Right. And Dr. Harper suggests this could cause real disruption there, too. Potential shortages, production delays for tech companies, rising prices for critical materials.
So higher costs for everything from phones to military gear.
Potentially, yes. It could lead to production slowdowns across various sectors that rely even indirectly on these materials.
Okay, so what's the U.S. doing? Or what can it do? Are there options?
Well, the long-term plays are trying to diversify supply chains, find or develop sources outside China, and significantly scale up domestic capabilities, especially processing.
But that sounds easier said than done.
Oh, definitely. The article is clear. It needs substantial and sustained investment, major technological advances, and it will likely mean higher costs overall compared to just buying from China. It's not a quick fix.
It sounds like this wasn't totally unforeseen, though. The article mentions a Trump executive order.
Yes, there was an order telling the Commerce Department to figure out ways to boost U.S. production and cut that import reliance. It specifically framed it as a national security risk.
But the U.S. used to be a leader in this field, right? What happened?
Yeah, that's the irony. Until the 1980s, the U.S. was the biggest producer. But China scaled up massively, often with lower costs and, as we mentioned, looser regulations. U.S. companies just couldn't compete on price and largely got out.
So now the U.S. has, what, one mine?
One active mine, yes. And crucially, it doesn't have the facility to do the complex separation of those heavy rare earths. So the ore actually gets shipped to China for processing.
Shipped to China. Wow, okay.
Mm.
And the article mentioned Trump was looking at places like Ukraine or Greenland.
That's right, exploring potential deals or access to reserves in other countries. But Dr. Harper adds a note of caution there.
How so?
Well, he suggests that a very adversarial foreign policy, like alienating China while also potentially antagonizing allies or potential partners with tariffs, could actually make it harder to build those alternative supply chains. You need cooperation.
Right, you can't demand help while pushing partners away. Makes sense.
It complicates securing reliable alternatives, definitely.
Okay, so pulling it all together, China's dominance over rare earths is clearly a major strategic challenge for the U.S. It hits defense, it hits manufacturing, and these new restrictions really bring that vulnerability into sharp focus, especially now.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating example of how these, seemingly niche materials have become central to geopolitics and economic security. The BBC piece really illuminated that interconnectedness. Hopefully diving into it gives a much clearer picture of the stakes.
Definitely. And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Considering how vital rare earths turned out to be, what other resources, maybe things we aren't focused on right now, could become similarly strategic down the road? And how can countries even prepare for that kind of uncertainty in global supply and power? Something to think about. Thanks for joining our deep dive today.